you can do the ideal state of nature society if you have like a few cavemen, but if you have like a whole country full of people all with different needs and with so much complex stuff going on, it's not gonna work. Like the ideal society is not gonna work, so it has to have something else, like a government was to handle it.
That's a good point, and that's exactly what a lot of these political philosophers believed. And that's why we get to the social contract. In order to achieve a society in which that's actually possible to manage, and a society where everyone has like rights and stuff like that, people have to agree to relinquish some of their freedom and some of their autonomy. For example, the freedom to kill someone. They have to relinquish these rights to a government that can enforce social order. And that's called the state of nature. That's called the social contract. A contract between people in society to relinquish some of their autonomy to the government for the benefit of everyone. So does anyone have any questions up to this point? Alan says, I want to contradict Michael because the people are free men/women and they don't have to worry about managing, but then he has a good point. So I don't know who to side with. Okay, well, I'll introduce the sides of several political philosophers, so maybe that will give you a better idea. If no one has any other questions about state of nature or social contract, let's get right on to the first of the major political philosophers in the modern age that we're going to talk about, and that's John Locke. I'm sure that a lot of you probably have heard of John Locke. He's the guy in the picture on the right, obviously. John Locke was a prominent philosopher who believed that humans are fundamentally good, but that the state of nature is fundamentally bad for humans. He believed that humans have fundamental rights that come on the basis of being human and that are unconditional. These rights are life, liberty, and property. So does anyone remember the rights that are the inalienable rights in the United States? What are the three of them?
Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, exactly. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So as we can see, that's actually really similar to John Locke's fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property. I guess the founding fathers just decided to remove property, maybe because it sounded bad or something. I'm not sure. But as we can see, the founding fathers of the United States. Go ahead. Did you say something?
I think I know why they didn't include property, because America had slaves at that time, and slaves were considered property, but they kind of were human too. So if they said property, then they would have made slaves angry because they couldn't.
I mean, weren't the slaves already angry?
I'm not sure if that's the exact reason, but it could be. But regardless of the reason, that's not important to our discussion. The point is that the founding fathers of the United States.
I never think about it. I always say. Oh.
Sorry, what'd you say? I didn't hear you.
What are racing? Michael. Why are supposed to be a pig?
Do you want to think in the chat?
I think I have a question for you.
Tommy, please stop. Please just
Here, I'll mute you. Okay, well, you can type the question in the chat if you'd like. So what I was saying is that the founding fathers of the United States drew a lot of inspiration from philosophers like Locke, especially when we take a look at things like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This just goes to show that philosophy has had such a huge impact on the world. It's shaped the US government and many other governments to this day. So going back to Locke, Locke believed that the natural rights of life, liberty, and property are not protected in the state of nature. He claimed that since humans are rational, they wanted to find a way to protect their natural rights. The solution is called the social contract, which we just talked about, an agreement between humans to protect their own rights and to not infringe upon the rights of others. Finally, Locke also believed that humans must rule themselves based on everyone's needs, which means that he was essentially a supporter of democracy, which is not surprising because of the time period that he came in. Any questions on John Locke? So he says, I don't think property is a fundamental right because it only is in capitalism.
Are
That's
there
a fair
any
point, I guess. Jesse, go ahead.
political philosophers that don't support democracy?
Yeah, we're actually, I mean, Plato didn't support democracy, and we're actually going to talk about the next one. Is also not exactly a huge supporter of democracy. Okay. So now we're going to move on to Thomas Hobbes. Unlike John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and by the way, that's this guy on the right. Thomas Hobbes believed that humans are fundamentally evil. His reasoning was that without rules or a government, humans steal, lie, murder, and destroy things. However, Hobbes agreed with Locke that the state of nature was terrible for humans because he described it as cruel, short, and brutish. That's kind of a famous quote that he wrote describing the state of nature. Therefore, Hobbes also promoted the idea of a social contract. However, his reasoning was a bit different than Locke's. Locke claimed that people would create social contracts and form governments because they wanted to help each other and themselves. Hobbes claimed that people should form a government and consolidate power in one person to prevent everyone from doing harm to everyone else. If you think like that sounds like a monarchy, you're right. That's essentially a monarchy. Hobbes was a proponent of absolute monarchy, where all the power lies in one person. So if anyone has, Anthony, I see your hand, I'll take it later. If anyone has ever read the book Leviathan or heard of it, it's a famous book by Thomas Hobbes where he describes the government as a monster with tentacles that control everything. So obviously that's kind of like a monarchy, not a democracy. Finally, one last thing about Hobbes. He isn't exactly a strong supporter of monarchy. I guess the better way to describe it is that he believes that the state of nature is so bad, it's so cruel, short, and brutish that whatever government is better than that. And he just thinks that monarchy is easiest to maintain and easiest to prevent us from falling into state of nature. Okay, Anthony, go ahead.
So what you're saying is that Thomas Hobbes believed in a Soviet-esque government where everything was controlled by the Kremlin, basically.
Well, he thinks that that's the most stable alternative to the state of nature, which is like the worst possible.
Highly doubtable.
Oh, I mean, definitely he's a lot of people disagree with his work, but it's influential nonetheless.
It seems ironic that history played out the exact opposite of what he predicted.
That's true. It seems like democracies in the modern world are much more stable than, I guess, monarchies.
Kind of.
Although, I mean, maybe his point is still valid. Maybe it was like by coincidence that this happened. I don't know. It's definitely.
That was a long time ago, though.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see the chat. Alan says, if we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and I was a serial killer and killing people with machetes was my pursuit of happiness. Well, okay, that's not. I mean, obviously, no one has an absolute right to, especially liberty and happiness. This just means that you have like a reasonable amount of that right. No one has like. It's hard to think of any absolute right. Like, even the right to life. People think that's an absolute right, and yet the U.S. government still does these extremely controversial airstrikes and violates the right to life of other people. Liberty, you're like, if you do something wrong, you're gonna go to jail. Is that absolute liberty? Not really. And same with pursuit of happiness. So when we're talking about rights, it's important to remember that we're not actually talking about absolute rights. So he says some nations with democracy are slowly falling apart. There arguably are some examples of that. So maybe. Alan says, I disagreed with Thomas Hobbes until the 2016 election. That's funny. Okay. Anthony, is your hand still raised or is it just... Okay. So the discussion question here is, who was right about human nature? Who do you guys agree with? John Locke, who believed that human nature is inherently good, and humans are actually corrupted by society, or Thomas Hobbes, who believes that humans are fundamentally evil and have to be controlled by society?
I can't agree with any of them because
Yeah, me too.
towards the end, Locke was a professor at like the Institute of Science or something, and he spent the most of his later days just arguing with another scientist. I think his name was Hook or something. Well, either way, you need a mix of control and democracy. You need democracy for the people to support you, and control to just keep them from revolting.
Okay, that's a fair point. And Michael, were you going to say something?
I don't agree with them either. Like with either of them. So like.
I mean, what is your viewpoint?
Also, I think maybe like it kind of goes back to that argument over some things are just very controversial. I don't think humans are fundamentally evil, but eventually society. But sometimes evil things still happen because of many factors. Also, like there's many controversial things, so you still can't have that idea. Like there's many things that prevent having an ideal society. So we need a government, but we need a democratic one.
That's a fair point.
Also like when they say democratic nations are falling apart, like maybe it's because a lots of freedom of speech might cause political polarization. But actually, I think people still deep down really love democracy because if the freedom was taken away, they'd be really angry.
Okay, so 2 points. First of all, you mentioned that something about democracy and how deep down people still like it. That's actually our discussion topic. For today, we're going to talk about if democracy is fundamentally good or is it just a Western cultural phenomenon. But we're not going to get that until later. You also said that something about how freedom of speech causes political polarization. Do you want to expand on that?
Maybe does someone else want to?
It's okay if you don't want to. I was just curious.
Well, I kind of want to, like there's a lot of people posting about politics on social media, and sometimes people like have huge arguments about them, and it's just really hard to decide what to do, so I just choose to not post anything.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, do you think that the alternative of not having free speech would alleviate that problem, or would it make it worse?
Well, I guess it would alleviate it in some ways. It would prevent huge arguments and fights. But like then people can't really pick out the government's fault and like oppose the government's bad decisions, which is not good. So I guess it has more pros than cons.
That's actually, yeah, I agree with you. I think there's some unfortunate consequences of freedom of speech, but ultimately I do think that there's also more pros and cons than cons.
If you force somebody them to think that thing.
What'd you say? I think you cut out a bit, or maybe I cut out.
If you force someone to say something, you can't also force them to think that.
You can brainwash people.
It's scientifically not possible anyway.
Well, I guess one of the
water,
benefits of freedom of speech is that you can prevent this, like, I guess, political brainwashing. But I don't know, maybe.
The thing about the freedom of speech is that there will always be a dissenting opinion, like it or not. That's the only drawback from freedom of speech.
Is that really a drawback though? Like maybe dissenting opinions could be right sometimes, and maybe like even if they're usually wrong, maybe the times that they are right are so important that it's worth it.
Perhaps,
but
usually though like countries with freedom of speech, like the U.S., have their social media into a political battle royale, and countries who try to restrict free speech, like China, So I don't know. Free speech can be good or
Wait.
bad.
Try to suppress the protest as well.
How, Gu, did you have something to say?
I was just gonna say that free speech actually has a lot more drawbacks because people that are usually not in the government or on social media have they can influence a lot of people.
Yeah. They can. Sorry. You go. I'm sorry.
Also, freedom of speech actually draws a lot of controversy, in my opinion, because it causes a lot of disagreements. For example, the other day, me and my friend got in an argument over whether Taiwan was part of China, and I'm pretty sure
Oh man.
that's a part of it.
Another drawback about freedom of speech is that anyone can claim scientific knowledge and just talk about it. Like all those crackpot conspiracy theorists. They're like, oh, believe me, I've had medical training, blah blah blah, and then they're just using this scientific knowledge as a front for to sell their products.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, fake news is obviously really problematic.
No, but sometimes we've actually gone backwards with science because now there are people who think that Australia doesn't exist and the world is flat.
Oh, no.
And 5G towers cause coronavirus.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I heard that people in Europe were tearing down cell towers because they thought it transmitted
It looks like Thomas Hobbes is laughing at the stupidity of all of this.
He's smirking.
Okay, well, what I was going to jump in and say is that, in my all of your opinions are, I think that they have merit, but I think that freedom of speech, when used correctly, is probably very important. I mean, this is kind of unrelated, but this is kind of the reason why I started this program, because I believe that freedom of speech, right now, it's everything is so polarized in the United States, and it's really hard to have progress when everything is just a political pendulum swinging from one side to the other. It's really hard to make actual progress. So I think freedom of speech is really important for having these actual discussions, and not trying to just attack the opponent. But regardless, that's kind of unrelated to what we're saying. So let me get back to the topic. So Sissy says, I agree that freedom of speech is good, but with too much, especially through social media, very extreme ideas and sometimes harmful ones become very loud. That can definitely be possible, but I guess the counter argument to what you said is maybe trying to suppress them gives them even more.
Freedom of speech.
Um,
Freedom of speech, good, but if you have too much of it, people will just keep on talking, and once they talk bad and keep on repeating it, some people will actually listen to it. So I'd say freedom of speech is okay, but you can't just force people to believe you just because you want them to.
Well said. I think Twitter is doing a good job, flagging Twitter posts. This one's unscientific. This one's heavily biased.
They've only been flagging Trump's posts, right?
It's good to have freedom of speech, but you also need to set boundaries. You can't just be spitting straight lies here.
That's a good point. Maybe I should have had the discussion topic be freedom of speech, but oh well. Okay. Anyone have any last comments before I move on?
I was gonna agree.
Is this really the last one?
The last meeting?
No, it's the last
I'll talk
one
about
on
that
this
later.
topic.
I was gonna say that I was gonna agree with you why Twitter hasn't just flagged all of Trump's tweets.
Well, they're still beginning to do this. The process is beginning, but
That violates the freedom of speech.
Are on, and then they're spending money on.
It's really surprising that Twitter hasn't stopped people from just posting random comments that can really.
that's Twitter's problem. I guess for safety right now, just stay off social media altogether.
I mean, yeah, I think there's definitely two sides of the
Just
Twitter
remember
debate.
to use WeChat for.
Alan, wait, never mind. Sorry.
Okay, I want to finish this slideshow, so I'm just gonna move on. But free speech definitely a very interesting and very interesting topic to discuss. So the final political philosopher we're going to talk about is John Rawls. And before we talk about John Rawls, let's do a little